Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, and my newsletter are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank customers who bring me onto their programs as a technical product accelerator to work alongside their teams, helping them develop products smarter and faster without adding risk and while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organizations. Learn more at innoguide.net. In this episode, number 109, we'll be sharing part 2 of My Best Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings by Terry O'Reilly. I really enjoyed this book, and I love Terry's podcast as well. I also appreciate the lessons that these seemingly unfortunate missteps teach us about life being more of a journey than a series of destinations. So without further ado, let's get started. John Harvey Kellogg was a man with a vision and some very unusual methods. In the late 19th century, he transformed a modest Michigan health retreat into what he called a place where people learned to stay well. The facility blended hospital, spa, monastery, and revival camp into one. Patients endured morning calisthenics, laughing exercises, mechanical chest beaters, vibrating platforms, and a steam-powered enema capable of moving 15 gallons through the bowels in minutes. Oop! Kellogg was also a serious intellect, reading medical journals in French and German at a time when Harvard Medical School gave no exams because few students could read at all. He believed happiness lived in the digestive tract, and that bland food would suppress lust. Then, on August 8, 1894, Kellogg and his brother Will left some cooked wheat uncovered in the kitchen. That accident would change everything. When the Kellogg brothers returned to find their cooked wheat had gone stale, they ran it through a roller, hoping to salvage something. Instead of dough, they got flakes. They roasted them, served them to patients, and the patients loved them. Will Keith patented the process in 1896 and launched the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company in 1906. The brothers split over sugar. John Harvey believed it would arouse patients sexually, so Will Keith went alone. He proved a gifted marketer. In the 20s, kids mailed box tops for prizes. During the Depression, while competitors cut advertising, he doubled it, and sales rose. One of his biggest rivals was C.W. Post, a former sanitarium patient. Today, Kellogg sells in 180 countries, all from one kitchen mistake. Here's an interesting story about a heartthrob, Rob Lowe. Do you believe there was a time when girls had absolutely no interest in him? Robert Hepler Lowe was born in 1964 in Charlottesville, Virginia, and raised in Dayton, Ohio. He lost hearing in his right ear before his first birthday. At 8, he saw a production of Oliver and decided with complete certainty that he wanted to be on that stage. He started landing commercials, local TV work, and summer stock roles, and was building something quietly in Ohio. But then his mother remarried and moved the family to Malibu. 12-year-old Rob was not thrilled, but Malibu had one thing Dayton couldn't offer. Martin Sheen lived 4 doors away. Rob became friends with Charlie and Emilio and with Sean and Chris Penn. His high school classmates included Robert Downey Jr. and Cary Grant's daughter, Jennifer. After school, several days a week, Lowe took a 2-hour bus ride into Hollywood to audition. He landed 2 ABC afternoon specials, and a co-starring role in a sitcom that landed 11 episodes. When it was canceled, he nearly walked away entirely. He decided to do one last audition, applied to USC Film School as a backup. Flew to New York alongside a laser-focused Tom Cruise. He got the role. Francis Ford Coppola's process involved groups of 20 or more on a giant soundstage, switching roles mid-scene without preparation. Those chosen alongside Lowe included Cruise, Patrick Swayze, and Matt Dillon. Most of Lowe's scenes were cut, and he felt blindsided and humiliated. But none of it really mattered. When he snuck into an opening day screening in Westwood in March 1983, the theater was packed with young women who screamed from the first frame to the last. The crowd spotted him as the lights came up. He and C. Thomas Howell were chased all the way to the car. The term Brat Pack was coined by journalist David Blum in 1985. His piece was not flattering. He described a roving band of young stars already drunk on attention and privilege. The core group included Estevez, Lowe, Ali Sheedy, Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, Demi Moore, and Andrew McCarthy. They hated the label, and the public loved them more for it. Lowe was the hottest of them all. People broke into his house to steal his underwear. And somewhere inside that swirling vortex of fame, Rob Lowe was about to make a nearly catastrophic mistake. What could this be? Well, it was July 1988, and Rob Lowe is now 24 years old. He's campaigning for Mike Dukakis and trying very hard to be taken seriously. He had spent years on Tiger Beat covers, but he wanted something more. So there he was in Atlanta the night before the Democratic National Convention, at a party hosted by CNN founder Ted Turner, then later at a downtown club called Club Rio on Lucky Street. In the VIP section, 2 young women asked to meet him. Around 2 a.m, all 3 climbed into a cab to his suite at the Atlanta Hilton. What happened there would become one of the first commercially distributed celebrity sex tapes in American history. The next day, one of the women returned to Club Rio boasting about the night. According to the waitress, they had stolen $200 from Lowe's wallet, pocketed a bottle of pills, and walked out with the videotape. Copies were made. Then the tape reached WAGA-TV in Atlanta, broke on CNN, and Tom Brokaw led NBC's Evening News with the story. The second story that night was the uprising in Tiananmen Square. But the tape was stranger than anyone expected. It was part sex tape, part fragmented travelogue, Lowe taking batting practice with the Atlanta Braves, attending an anti-Klan rally, and giving directions off camera like he was running a production. Porn publisher Al Goldstein paid $5,000 for a copy and sold brief clips by mail order for $29.95 each. But then something more serious emerged. One of the women, Jan Parsons, had been 16 years old. Her mother filed a civil suit. The Fulton County District Attorney began investigating a possible felony charge carrying a 20-year sentence. Lowe's defense was that Club Rio was a 21 or older venue, and Parsons had used a fake ID. His lawyers also alleged that her mother had sought money before filing the suit. His lawyers eventually paid an undisclosed settlement, and the DA chose not to prosecute. Lowe agreed to 20 hours of community service. And then the one thing everyone in Hollywood fears most happened. The phone stopped ringing. But then Lorne Michaels called, asking Lowe to host Saturday Night Live. His lawyer said no. His agent said no. On his 26th birthday, he defied his entire management team and did it anyway. The cold open was deliberately brutal. Hecklers, silence, someone yelling about his daughter, until John Lovitz strolled out and the crowd erupted. By mocking himself first, Lowe cut off the media's punchlines at the source. Underneath that, something darker was unfolding. One morning, his mother left an urgent message. His grandfather had suffered a massive heart attack. Lowe stared at the answering machine, too drunk to pick up the phone. And at 29, he entered rehab in Arizona. Cheryl Burkhoff, a makeup artist he had first met on a blind date in 1983, visited him every Thursday for the 1 hour allotted to visitors. Over 4 weeks, he earned back her trust. After a year of daily recovery meetings, he asked her to marry him. The SNL appearance led to Wayne's World, then Austin Powers, then The West Wing, then Parks and Recreation. From 1999 onward, Lowe has had a series on air continuously. He told The Guardian the scandal was the best thing that ever happened to him. The scandal got me sober. Sober got me married. Marriage gave me 2 sons. All traced back to a cab ride at 2 a.m. It's quite a story. Here's a person whose story I would have never guessed started out this way. Let's go back to 1957. A teenager named Roger Daltrey stood up at a neighborhood youth club in East Acton, London, and sang Heartbreak Hotel. Afterward, people swarmed him. He called singing a magical friend maker. A few of those new friends suggested starting a band. What followed was about as humble a beginning as you can get. The group scraped together a tea-chest bass, a washboard, 1 electric guitar, a single amp, and a handmade guitar Daltrey had built himself at his sheet metal factory job. Everyone plugged into the same amp, including the microphones. They were a skiffle group, a late 50s style combining blues, jazz, and folk, played largely on improvised instruments, most of which could be found in the kitchen. Then their bass player quit because the gigs weren't paying enough to cover his instrument payments. A classic early band catch-22. You can't earn money without the gear. You can't afford the gear without the money. Then Daltrey spotted a large guy carrying the biggest homemade bass guitar he had ever seen. That was John Entwistle, nicknamed the Ox. Formally trained on the French horn, lured away from a triad jazz band by Daltrey's slightly exaggerated claim that the detours were earning real money. Pete Townshend came next. Bullied relentlessly for his prominent nose, Daltrey said he looked like a nose on a stick. He auditioned in January 1962 at 16. He was in immediately. The band then lost their only amp, so Daltrey built large plywood boxes covered in wood grain paper and placed them over tiny cheap amps. The visual effect was enormous. The audio effect, not so much. In January 1963, their lead singer Colin left to pursue a career in bacon sales. Daltrey took over vocals, and someone misheard a name suggestion. The Who. Everyone stopped. They loved it. Keith Moon arrived in April 1964, walking up during a gig and performing an impromptu audition. His art teacher had called him retarded artistically, idiotic in other respects. His music teacher, though, said he had great ability, but needed to guard against showing off. That tendency to show off was exactly what impressed the band. Shortly after, an ad man named Pete Meaden told them their real problem. They had no image. The Beatles were the white sheep. The Stones were the black sheep. Both positions were taken. Be the red sheep. So they just needed to find the hook. And then Pete Townshend made an embarrassing mistake. It happened on a Tuesday night in September 1964 at a small West London venue called the Railway Hotel. The Who were mid-set when Pete Townshend drove his Rickenbacker straight through the ceiling, snapping the neck clean off. The room went quiet. The girls in the front row laughed. So Townsend smashed the guitar to pieces right there on stage to make it look intentional. The next week, Keith Moon kicked over his drums. And just like that, a ritual was born. Audiences came expecting the destruction finale. Moon installed cherry bombs in his kit. Lineups stretched around the block. Rolling Stone later named the original accident one of the 50 moments that changed rock and roll. What began as humiliation became a signature. I never would have guessed that. Here's a story about Labatt Beer. Back in early 1992, a commercial director needed to cast a radio campaign for Labatt Beer. The beer category was flush with ad money, which made finding great comedic actors who weren't already locked into competing brand work nearly impossible. So he cast in Los Angeles. He needed about 10 actors for recurring roles across 5 commercials. One role called for a very funny woman in her mid-20s. After reviewing over 150 audition tapes, one stood out. The lines were short, nowhere to hide, and she delivered every one of them. He rewound her tape and listened to it over and over again. On recording day, the studio was full of experienced television actors. Comfortable, chatty, professional, they all knew each other. Except for one young woman. She backed slowly into a corner, brand new to voiceover work, unbelievably shy. But when she stepped up to the microphone, she was so funny that even the veterans stifled laughs. That shy woman was Ellen DeGeneres, a star before she was a star. Between takes, she quietly fielded calls from her agent, waiting on news about a new sitcom. That sitcom, These Friends of Mine, premiered on ABC in March 1994. After the first season, it was retooled and renamed Ellen, partly to distinguish it from Friends, which had just launched on NBC. The show debuted in the Nielsen Top 5. Then it slowly slid to number 30, hitting every rung on the way down. At one point, an executive suggested Ellen could inject new life into the show by adopting a puppy. But her producers had a different idea. They wanted Ellen's character to come out as gay. ABC only agreed to let them write a script, with final approval still pending. The first draft was rejected for not going deep enough. Meanwhile, everyone on Ellen's business team, her publicist, her agent, her manager, they all begged her to walk away. They called it a career-ending mistake. But she pushed forward anyway. When the writers finally delivered a workable script, they titled it, as a deliberate inside joke, The Puppy Episode. 3 weeks before it aired, Time magazine put Ellen on the cover with the headline, "Yep, I'm gay." This was no longer just a character announcement. Jerry Falwell called her Ellen DeGenerate. J.C. Penney and Chrysler pulled their ads. A bomb threat forced an evacuation during filming. Ellen received death threats. 42 million people watched. The episode won 2 Primetime Emmy Awards. Then ABC canceled the show. No one from the network called to tell Ellen. An assistant read the news in the trades. She lost her career, then her agent, then fell into depression. And for 3 years, no job offers came. Only one person called, Madonna, whom Ellen had never met, but she told her she was brave and that this would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. Although she couldn't see it at the time, her luck was about to change. In 2001, a Pixar screenwriter named Andrew Stanton was stuck. He was writing Finding Nemo and had an idea for a fish with short-term memory loss. He called her Dory. But everything he wrote came out flat. He just couldn't crack the character. Then the television was on in the background, and a syndicated episode of Ellen was playing. He wasn't really watching until he heard Ellen's character change the subject 5 times in a single sentence. That was Dory. Stanton tracked Ellen down and begged her to take the role. He had no idea her sitcom had been canceled, and he had no idea she'd been unemployed for years. Ellen jumped at it. She would later say that the role saved her life, and she took Dory's motto, "Just keep swimming," to heart. Meanwhile, Will and Grace had premiered in 1998 and became the highest-rated sitcom for adults 18 to 49 from 2001 to 2005, with 2 gay leading characters. The cultural climate was now shifting. CBS offered Ellen a new sitcom. Her being gay was no longer an issue. The network would have fought any attempt to make the character straight. It was canceled after 13 episodes anyway, but momentum was building. When Ellen wanted a daytime talk show, station managers resisted hard. One actually said, "No one's going to watch a lesbian during the day." Her producer's solution was direct. Go on tour and show them who you are. She won them over one room at a time. The Ellen DeGeneres Show launched September 8, 2003, and received 12 Emmy nominations in its debut season, the most ever for a first-season talk show. The show eventually earned 166 daytime Emmy nominations and held the top-rated talk show position for 8 straight years. J.C. Penney, the very company that had pulled its advertising after her coming out episode, eventually made Ellen their spokesperson. In 2016, President Obama awarded her Presidential Medal of Freedom, noting how easy it had become to forget just how much courage it had required. In the end, Ellen says she wouldn't change any of it. Now we go in a completely opposite direction. In 1962, Stan Lee wanted to create a lovable monster. As a kid, he'd been moved by the Boris Karloff Frankenstein films, not by the violence, but by the innocence. The monster wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was hunted simply because of how he looked. Lee blended that with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a character with no control over his own duality, and the result was the Incredible Hulk. His philosophy was simple. Readers had to genuinely care about the character, believe in the heroic Jekyll side, and they'd accept the monstrous Hyde side. So Bruce Banner became a physicist who shields a boy from a gamma bomb. Believable, even if not realistic. I loved that show. The Hulk's skin was deliberately gray to avoid offending any ethnicity. Then a printing error changed everything. The printer couldn't hold a consistent gray. When the first Hulk comics came off the press, ink density kept shifting. Light gray one page, dark gray the next, nearly black on another page. Stan Lee didn't want a hero whose skin color changed randomly. So he called the printer and asked what color could be printed reliably. Almost anything, the printer said. Gray was the tricky one. So Lee asked a second question. What color wasn't anyone else using? Green came to mind immediately. No deliberation. That single decision, forced by a mechanical issue, gave the Hulk a completely unique look and made him the first popular superhero who was genuinely a monster. And all of it traced back to a printing mistake they couldn't fix in the comic strip. Here's one I never would have guessed. In 1905, an 11-year-old named Frank Epperson left a cup of soda water on his porch overnight with a stirring stick still in it. The temperature dropped to a record low, and by morning the drink was frozen solid. He ran it under hot water, pulled it free, and thought it tasted pretty good. Epperson called it the Epsicle. 18 years later, he was a real estate man with kids of his own, and he started selling them commercially. His children didn't like the name. They called it Pop's Sickle. He listened, and the popsicle was born. By 1924, sales reached 6.5 million units. When the Depression hit and the 10-cent ice cream market collapsed, the 5-cent popsicle doubled its sales. Over 200 million sold in 1931 alone. The company called itself depression-proof. Epperson went broke anyway and sold his royalty rights. He regretted it for the rest of his life. Today, Unilever sells over 2 billion popsicles every year. Who doesn't love a popsicle? Here's a story about Ike Turner's band. Sam Phillips was a hungry record producer with a small studio in Memphis. In 1950, he met Leonard Chess, a street-smart Chicago label owner, and they struck an immediate deal, a 50-50 split on any Phillips recording Chess released. One act Phillips was already recording was B.B. King, who introduced him to a 20-year-old band leader named Ike Turner. Turner's group, the King of Rhythm, had torn apart a roadhouse in Chambers, Mississippi. King told Turner getting into a studio could be that easy. Phillips called Turner that Monday. In March 1951, the five-piece band drove 70 miles down Route 61 on a rainy night, got fined for an overloaded vehicle, blew a tire, and then dropped the guitar amp onto the pavement, destroying the speaker cone. They had just one shot at a recording session, and now their amp was broken. Ike Turner's band pulled up to 706 Union Avenue in Memphis and figured they had the wrong address. This place looked like a sad little storefront. When they went inside to ask directions, the receptionist told them they were already standing in the Memphis recording service. Sam Phillips led them in. Then guitarist Willie Kizart plugged in his amp, and it made a horrible sound. The speaker cone was blown. While the band panicked, Phillips went quiet and listened. He told Kizart to stop fiddling with the knobs. He liked the sound. He ran next door, grabbed brown paper, wadded it up inside the amp to steady the vibration, and got to work. When they ran through an unfinished song called Rocket 88, named after the Oldsmobile 88, Phillips loved that damaged, distorted guitar rubbing against the saxophone. He had never heard anything like it. He swapped in baritone sax player Jackie Brenston, who had actually written the song on vocals. By June 1951, Rocket 88 was Chess Records' first #1 R&B hit. It predated Sun Records by a year and Elvis by 3. Phillips called it the first rock and roll record ever made. All of it started with a dropped amp and a producer who heard something broken and thought it was beautiful. This next story is about something everybody loves. Kathleen King grew up on 30 acres in Noyac, Long Island, not the glamorous Hamptons, kind of place where her father once bartered half a steer to pay the dentist. When King was 11, her older sisters slipped away from the farm stand to meet boys in town. Her father told Kathleen to pick up the slack and to earn enough to buy her school clothes. She started with the recipe on the back of a Nestle Toll House bag. Her measuring was imprecise, but somehow that made the cookies better. She settled on a 5-inch diameter so they would stand out. Word spread. People drove there specifically for the cookies. By high school, she was baking 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, through every summer. She studied restaurant management in college and came home in 1979 for what she thought was one last summer. That is when her mother informed her it was, in fact, her last summer, and mentioned, almost as an aside, that a fully equipped bakery was available in town. 2 previous businesses had failed there, but King rented it anyway, painted old farm barrels for decor, and opened Kathleen's Bake Shop in May 1980. That summer, New York Times food writer Florence Fabricant wrote that the cookies were worth putting miles on the odometer. King filled a shopping bag and started knocking on doors in Manhattan. Dean and DeLuca, Balducci's, and Bloomingdale's all said yes. To keep up, she was arriving at 2 in the morning and leaving around 8 at night. She later admitted that one night, exhausted beyond reason, she briefly considered driving into a tree just to rest in a hospital. She eventually bought her own building in Southampton for $350,000. By her late 30s, she had paid off her parents' farm mortgage. But she wanted travel, languages, less weight on her shoulders, and she decided to sell. Her longtime bookkeeper proposed paying roughly $900,000 over time while taking over management. King liked him, but he had one condition. He wanted to bring his brother in as a third partner. King wasn't entirely comfortable with that. She didn't know the brother. But they promised national expansion, and she wanted her freedom. So in 1998, she agreed. Did Kathleen King make a mistake? Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. A woman builds a beloved bakery from nothing, spends over 2 decades growing it into a community institution, and then loses the whole thing in a single act of misplaced trust. She gets fired from her own company and locked out by armed security guards. Then she builds it back into a $100 million business. That's the story of Kathleen King. It started with a handshake she probably should not have made. 2 brothers wanting to become equal partners, with her lawyer urging her to reconsider. But King had already given her word, so she honored it, letting them run a new cookie factory in Virginia while she managed the original Southampton shop. The trouble arrived around December 1999. Cookies came back wrong. Pies were terrible. At one point, King found a whole uncut apple inside a finished pie. Cheaper ingredients, changed packaging, unpaid vendors. She started covering their bills using the bake shop's own revenue. The brothers accused her of stealing. Then a loyal employee tipped her off. While King was away on a planned cycling trip, the brothers intended to walk in and take over. She postponed the trip. One morning, she arrived to find them blocking the entrance, termination papers in hand, armed guards posted. They controlled 2/3 of the company, so they could do all of this legally. King was 42, emotionally shattered, and now discovered $600,000 in hidden debt. 1/3 of it legally hers. Customers picketed for 6 straight months, carrying signs that read, "No Kathleen, no cookies." After 8 months of lawsuits, she kept the Southampton building and walked away with $200,000 in debt. She lost the name, the recipes, and the wholesale business. So what did she do? She reopened as Tate's Bake Shop, named after her father, a man known locally for kindness and integrity. 700 people lined up the day before opening. This time, she took the emotion out of her business dealings. The belief that the bakery was her identity had been a trap. She hired a business manager and set a clear exit goal. Build a great company, sell it, retire at 55. Growth was methodical. Small stores, then upscale gourmet shops, then Whole Foods. Rachel Ray called it the best cookie in America. Consumer Reports agreed in 2011. Revenue reached $6 million, 40 states, 30% growth year over year. At 55, she executed the plan. 80% of Tate's sold to investment firm Riverside for $100 million. 4 years later, Riverside sold to Mondelez International for $500 million. The biggest disaster of her life, she says, became the greatest gift. Now that's a story that makes me hungry for cookies. Now switching from baking to building, Owens Corning's fiberglass pink insulation commands a 7-to-1 market share over its competitors. And it got there through 2 big mistakes. The first happened in 1932. A Corning glass researcher named Dale Kleist was trying to seal glass blocks using molten glass as a sealant. He accidentally aimed a stream of compressed air at the molten glass, and it came out a spray of tiny lightweight fibers. That mistake became fiberglass. A 1938 magazine article called it a new marvel of science, noting that a single quarter-ounce marble could produce 90 miles of fiber. Before fiberglass, builders insulated with horsehair, straw, rags, and newspaper, materials that rotted when wet and burned when dry. Fiberglass solved both problems at once. Then, facing a wave of competitors, Owens Corning dyed their insulation red. Nobody expected what happened next. For the first 100 years of modern branding, you could not trademark a color. Then a factory made a mistake. When, in 1957, the Owens Corning plant in Newark, Ohio, tried to add red dye to its fiberglass insulation, the dye wasn't concentrated enough. What came out was pink. Their customers were builders, decidedly male, and pink was decidedly not. So they shipped it with an apology, promising the next batch would be red. When the corrected red insulation arrived, installers asked for the pink back. Pink was unexpected and completely unique in a drab industry. By the 70s, Owens Corning was running with the slogan, "Put your house in the pink." In 1985, they applied to trademark the color itself, but no court had ever allowed that. When they proved consumers already associated pink with their product, backed by over $50 million in marketing, in 1987 they made legal history, the first single-color trademark ever granted, Pantone 210 Pink, for insulation. That precedent is why Tiffany can protect its robin's egg blue and Louboutin can protect the red sole. The key is proving a color has acquired secondary meaning, that consumers already see it and think of the brand. Then came a mascot, the Pink Panther, created in 1963, originally personified a flawed pink diamond. The animated character became so beloved that it spawned theatrical shorts, the first winning the 1964 Academy Award for Best Animated Short. In 1980, an Ogilvy and Mather copywriter suggested licensing the character. For over 40 years, the Pink Panther has appeared on every bat of insulation, a famous spokesperson that has never spoken a single word. The client's original challenge had been blunt: make me famous. They did, using nothing but a color that arrived by accident. This next one reminds me of a book our family picked up every year, and we would read it to see what the new year was going to bring. It all started in 1792. Robert B. Thomas published the first issue of the Farmer's Almanac for 9 cents a copy. His goal? Be useful with a pleasant degree of humor, covering planting charts, recipes, tide tables, and weather forecasts. Circulation jumped from 3,000 to 9,000 in a single year. What made it remarkable was its accuracy. Thomas used a secret formula rooted in Galileo's sunspot theory, 11-year solar cycles influencing earthly weather. For farmers, weather prediction was life or death, and the almanac was right nearly 80% of the time. Then came July 1816. A printer's helper, filling a forecast gap in the month of July, as a joke, wrote, "Snow and sleet." It slipped through unnoticed. Thomas raced to destroy every copy, but some had already shipped. Then a massive volcano erupted in the Dutch East Indies, sending dust circling the globe for 6 months and dropping temperatures worldwide. It snowed in July. That summer of no summer cemented the Farmer's Almanac as the definitive weather forecasting publication. Now the oldest continuously published periodical in North America, never missing a year. The closest it came was 1942, when American forces captured a German spy on Long Island, carried off a U-boat with a copy in his pocket. The War Department considered shutting the publication down, fearing its accurate forecasts could aid the enemy. The edition's solution was elegantly simple: rename weather forecasts to weather indications. That small change satisfied the War Department and saved the almanac. What can healthcare learn from the airline business? There are 13,000 different ways the human body can fail. That is the exact number of diseases, syndromes, and injuries classified by the World Health Organization. Many require surgery. The average American undergoes 7 operations in a lifetime, and surgeons across the U.S. perform over 50 million procedures every year. Here's the number that stopped me cold. In 2009, 150,000 Americans died immediately after surgery. 3 times the road accident death toll that same year, and half of those deaths were completely avoidable. That fact intrigued surgeon Atul Gawande of Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Humanity has accumulated extraordinary knowledge, and yet mistakes kept happening. Software fails, intelligence agencies miss threats, space shuttles explode. How does so much knowledge produce so many errors? Gawande went looking in other fields. In 1935, Boeing unveiled a bomber called the Model 299. It could carry 5 times the requested bomb load and fly twice as far as anything before it. Then it crashed on its first test flight. Nothing was mechanically wrong. The pilot simply had forgotten to release a new locking mechanism. One newspaper called it too much airplane for one man to fly. But a group of Boeing pilots responded not with more training, but with a checklist small enough for an index card. Pilots then flew the aircraft 1.8 million miles without a single accident. The same logic reached medicine. Johns Hopkins specialist Peter Pronovost created a 5-step checklist for inserting a central line IV. When nurses were empowered to enforce it, the 10-day infection rate dropped from 11% to 0, preventing 43 infections, saving 8 lives, and cutting $2 million in costs at a single hospital. Then Pronovost took the idea to Michigan. Within 3 months, bloodstream infection rates dropped 66% statewide. Over 18 months, the checklist saved an estimated 1,500 lives and nearly $200 million. Man is fallible, but men are not. Which raised a larger question. By 2004, surgeons worldwide were performing over 230 million major operations annually, leaving more than 7 million patients disabled and at least 1 million dead. That mortality rate matched malaria and tuberculosis. Could a single checklist reach all of them? So here's a question. If you're about to go into surgery, would you want the medical team to run through a checklist before picking up a scalpel? Most people say yes, immediately. The people actually holding the scalpel felt very differently. So in 2005, at a Columbus, Ohio hospital, appendicitis patients were getting infections at an alarming rate. The fix was simple in theory. Antibiotics had to be given exactly 1 hour before surgery. Too soon and they wore off. Too late and they never activated. The director of surgical administration, a pediatric cardiac surgeon who was also a pilot, did what pilots do. He built a checklist. 3 boxes: correct patient, correct site, correct antibiotic timing. He called it cleared for takeoff and placed a small metal tent stamped with those words directly over the scalpel. The surgeon could not pick it up until a nurse confirmed every box. After 10 months, 100% of patients received the antibiotic on time. What made surgeons uncomfortable was not the paperwork. Checklists spread responsibility around the room. Surgery had always been understood as an individual performance. Most of the world calls it an operating theater for a reason. Over 64% of surgeons believed their operating rooms already had high teamwork, but only 28% of nurses agreed. In 2008, pilot hospitals across 8 cities adopted a 19-step surgical checklist. Major complications fell 36%. Deaths fell 47%. infections fell nearly 50%. No new technology, no extra spending. After 3 months, 20% of the staff still disliked it. Asked whether they would want the checklist used on themselves, 93% said yes. By 1965, Mario Puzo had written 2 novels. The first earned him $3,500 in royalties. The second earned close to $3,000. Both got good reviews, but neither paid the bills. Puzo had grown up in the tenements of Hell's Kitchen, the son of illiterate Italian immigrants. He wanted to be a serious novelist. At 45, he still did, but he also had a wife, 5 kids, a mortgage, a gambling habit, and debts equivalent to $150,000, today's dollars. He pitched a book about organized crime, but his publisher called it a loser. 8 others agreed. Then he borrowed from sharks. Mario Puzo needed money fast, not the kind you save toward, kind you need before someone shows up at your door. Loan sharks kept very firm repayment schedules. So in 1965, a writer friend arranged a meeting with G.P. Putnam's sons. Puzo pitched a 10-page outline and told amusing mafia stories over lunch. The editors offered a $5,000 advance, $3,800 up front, the rest on delivery. He took it, but he didn't work on the book. To keep cash flowing, he wrote 3 adventure stories a month, a children's book, and pieces for the New York Times Sunday magazine. He still considered himself a serious author. The Godfather was just a cheap commercial idea for quick money. Then a self-imposed deadline forced his hand. He raced through the manuscript and handed Putnam a rough draft, telling them not to show it to anyone. His publisher eventually turned down $375,000 for the paperback rights, holding out for $410,000. Hours later, Fawcett paid exactly that. The hardcover hadn't even been released yet. Puzo's 50% share came to $205,000, and he paid off every debt, loan sharks included, with a $100,000 advance check. 3 months later, he called his publisher for more money. They were stunned. Puzo shrugged. $100,000 doesn't last forever. Then someone mentioned a motion picture. Puzo needed money, not in a vague, uncomfortable way, in a broken arm type way, mafia style. When he had about 114 pages of The Godfather written, his agents at William Morris shopped it around Hollywood. Paramount was mildly interested, though mildly is generous. The studio ranked 9th among film studios. Its parent company, Gulf and Western, made 5 times more money selling cigars in 1970 than it did making movies. So Paramount offered Puzo $12,500 for the option against $80,000 if the film went into production. William Morris told him to wait. A much bigger deal was coming. But Puzo owned $11,000 to people who were not patient, so he took the $12,500. For context, Jacqueline Suzanne's novel had just been optioned for $1 million. Philip Roth Portnoy's Complaint went for $400,000. Variety called what Paramount paid bargain basement literary buy. The Godfather stayed on the bestseller list for 67 weeks and had sold north of 25 million copies total. Puzo then earned $100,000 plus 2.5% of profits to write the screenplay. The film recouped all expenses within 2 weeks of opening. Puzo's desperation is precisely why Paramount got the property cheap enough to gamble on an inexperienced director and mostly unknown actors, and accidentally made a masterpiece. When you look back across every story in this book, a pattern emerges. In almost every case, someone made a mistake that seemed small at the time. Sometimes they didn't even notice it. But when the ripples became a tsunami, they all arrived at the same realization. They were stuck with it. Brian Williams couldn't untell his story. Ellen DeGeneres couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. Yet, from Mario Puzo to Kathleen King to Dixie Chicks to Steve Madden, those same mistakes fueled extraordinary growth. Spielberg sat in a hotel room with a malfunctioning fish and made one of the best movies ever because of the mistake. Bombardier ran with the typo Ski-Doo and created an unforgettable brand. The question to ask when a mistake feels career-ending is simply this: what is the hidden gift? So that wraps up part 2 of My Best Mistake Ever by Terry O'Reilly. While it makes for a bit of a different podcast than my usual, it does illustrate how we rarely see the silver lining at the time we encounter the surprise failure moments. Terry does a great job of showing us that we need to be both patient and resourceful to find our own silver linings when things don't go our way. Pick up a copy of his book, My Best Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings by Terry O'Reilly, for many more examples and the details that we glossed over in these overviews. I hope this has been helpful, and I invite you to find more podcast episodes, articles, resources, and information about how I help teams build minimum viable products faster and learn to put AI to practical use at innoguide.net. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and stay curious. I want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this episode, and I especially want to thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you next time. That's a wrap.